Good afternoon, everyone. Whilst everyone's connecting to audio and potentially bringing their AI meeting notes participants in, we'll wait for like 15, 30 seconds and then we'll get ourselves started. But thanks for joining us on a Wednesday afternoon. All right, it looks like everyone's at least connected to the audio. So first, thanks for spending Wednesday afternoon with us. I'm pleased to be joined by Ben and Van, who've both been through Antler residency, but are former corporate execs, moved to, I don't know whether it's the dark side or the light side, but startup founders. And I'll post a few questions with them, but really we're eager to hear like your questions either for them and their journey or about Antler and who we are and what we do. I'll kick off with like 5-10 minutes of just a brief overview of Antler the residency, what we do, how things work, and then we'll get into it. And a note on that you may see 3 companies mentioned here: Authentified, Andizer, and Antler. You are very welcome if your proposed company name does not start with A. It just so happens that we've got 3 of us together with things in A. So it's to kick us off, just like what this looks like. So who is Antler? We're a global VC fund. We're the most active pre-seed fund in the world, and we're here to make bets on individuals and teams looking to make generational businesses, and we back at day zero. So many VCs may say you're too early for us. We'll never say that. We may say you're not good enough. That's different. But like we're prepared to invest pre-revenue, pre-product, because we look and find the best founders out there. And what that looks like in what we've done in Australia over the last 5 years. Over 1,000 founders have been through the Antler residency. We've invested in about 300, going up towards 150 companies, and we run our residency historically always in Sydney first, then Melbourne from 2021, and in February next year we're going to be kicking off in Brisbane as well. I mean, we've got 3 locations where we're able to find those best founders in Australia. If you look kind of globally, we're in 27 cities. There's a large number of portfolio value and amount raised. But I think like what's important is when it comes to like bringing great people together, often the outcome is that you get impact and socially driven companies as the output. So our mandate isn't to only invest in those, but it turns out that when you get some pretty cool people together, more than nearly half the time, it revolves into impact companies if you were defining it based on that. And then the other piece, what's important for people based in Australia here, is actually access to international capital and markets is one of the biggest like chasms for Australian businesses to overcome. And that we're one of the few investors in Australia where we've got direct investor, customer, etc. connections through our sister teams in the other markets to really help internationalize and help Antler portfolio companies go global, both from an investor perspective and a customer perspective. Here's my favorite bit where I get to talk about founders that we've backed. But overall, there's 3 rough archetypes that we're looking at. There's tech product builders, business operators, and domain experts. And I'll quickly pick one from each of these 3. Tech product builders, let's talk about Tim. So Factory AI is a predictive analytics for heavy duty factory machinery. So if you're Bega or Arnott's and you want to know that, it's probably valuable to know that if a conveyor belt 5 is going to blow up in 3 days, you probably want to send someone out to fix it. That's what they're there to do. Tim had seen something like this in automotive, having worked for Amazon in their specific division around this, and saw the opportunity in food and beverage. He then met his co-founder JP, who had a background in selling to that persona. Fast forward a couple of years later, they've raised sort of large pre-seed round, and they're making some really strong moves with Bega and Arnott's actually as customers. On business and operators, let's talk about Lars. So he's a 3-time exit entrepreneur, most recent, the main one selling to Lazada Indonesia, they're saying to Alipay, sorry. Zalient is a computer vision company doing facial recognition at the edge. So if you imagine what's the way to be able to do facial recognition on a Ring doorbell without having to go to the cloud, Zalient would allow that to happen. The reason why I've chosen Lars is that this wasn't necessarily his idea coming in. This was actually the commercialized work from a PhD from the technical co-founder called Shivi. But Lars saw this as an opportunity. It was better than the things that he was considering to bring in. And fast forward 5 years later in their Series A stage with Sony Ventures as a main investor. And then on domain, I'll talk about Renee from Altiger. I spoke to her this morning. Altiger is a casting platform to mean that if you are a producer or a casting agent, how can you run your audition process to understand who best is in there or not. This is a B2B2C platform. She comes from this world. She was an agent. She ran casting and she's had such like a deep knowledge of the industry that paired with her co-founders. This was just an irresistible opportunity for us to be in. They've also recently raised what was at one point like the hottest pre-seed round in Australia for a month or so. When you add all this together, what it looks like is a bit like on the right, that the average work experience, you know, someone who's typically quite tenured, very topical for a corporate exec bit. People have often spent time like being an entrepreneur at some point, but ultimately what we're trying to do is bring a balance of people with tech and domain skills and like business and commercial skills to mean that we get complementary co-founding teams to be able to invest in. Obviously, there's one takeaway from this slide, which is most people get their logo from a similar designer. But I think the main bit of this is that we get quite a diversified set of companies coming that we end up investing in. That's not necessarily because we're trying to say we want to do more consumer tech this year, or we're into Web3 this time and we're not into it another time. You should sort of see this as a little bit of a barometer as to where the market's at and what are the types of problems that people are interested in solving. But the other takeaway of this is like there's not as long as it's a VC backable industry and business model, we're very comfortable from B2C wearables, hardware, software, robotics, not just good old B2B SaaS. I love a bit of B2B SaaS, but it's not just that. There's many other ways that you can build successful generational businesses. And a couple of examples of what can this look like if you fast forward a few bits down the track. These are three investments from either 2020 or 2019, all of which are at Series A stage, including typically like international investors. So this is kind of a proof of where things can get to within a relatively short time. And then on the bottom right, you've got a bunch of logos, which is the who's who of Australian investors. But also we're starting to get some really interesting international investors coming alongside and backing the businesses that we've backed a few years prior. All right, what actually happens in Antler residency? So the way to read the slide is the left-hand side is during the residency and the right-hand side is after we invest. On the left-hand side, the residency is split into two rough areas. One is formation and validation. So you should think of this of working out, if you're looking for a potential co-founder, who do you actually work best with? This is certainly not suggesting monogamy from day one, but understanding like who you think will be the best potential opportunity for you to work with, and then digging into the ideas, doing customer validation to understand your unfair advantage. Is there a big enough problem? And how to actually get towards a kind of problem size that is big enough with a team with an unfair advantage to go after it. That's when we move into the second bit of the residency, due diligence. That's where there's a team is formed going after a problem, and you'd work with a dedicated coach. It could be me, it could be one of our partners, one of our venture partners. We're there to be a mix of accountability partner, extended network, but probably more importantly, just getting you investment ready. And then you've got the best chance come IC day. Then the right-hand side of the slide is what happens after we invest. And like the left-hand side is 10 weeks, the right-hand side is up to 10 years. So there's much that goes into it. But like particularly for that first 12 months, where typically we're the only investor, we know that we've got a big role to play, and particularly around things that we know pretty well from having seen 100+ investments. So this is structuring fundraising round, advising on how best to approach the combination of angels, investors, and also meaning that we're a bunch of ex-founders and operators ourselves, how to overcome some of those early growth pain stages in that first 6 to 12 months. Then as you get further on, it's actually more of the global expansion, networks, talents, etc., that becomes more and more valuable for teams as they progress to sort of Series A and beyond. Last two bits is obviously we talk about the residency and the investment that comes from that. Something we've recently introduced, which has been, we've seen a big benefit for the portfolio companies we've got, is we've launched something we call Agreement for Rolling Capital, which is a structured programmatic way to enable more capital to come in as quickly as possible. The reason we do this is that we've seen that companies that raise a minimum of 300K in the first 12 months, they've got a nearly 50% likelihood of getting to Series A. If you don't, it's more like you've got a 10% chance of getting to Series A. Therefore, we want to stack the deck in your favor. So this means if you raise 300K from sophisticated investors within that first 12 months, we'll match 50% of those funds. Or the other way to think about it is if you raise $1 million, from other investors, we're in for 500, and importantly, we commit to this upfront. As long as you get to it, we're in. So that means you can pre-sell your round, and the more seasoned capital raisers amongst you will realize that having a third of your round filled and backing from your initial investor opens a whole bunch of doors that otherwise would be a bit locked to you. And then lastly, although we invest pre-product, pre-revenue in many cases, we've got the capacity through the global follow-on fund that looks at the winners from the different Antler locations to go from Series A to C. So this means that we can be a capital partner all the way up until Series C. The Elevate fund, they invest in up to like US $10 million size checks. And this is where they've got an inside view as to who you are, so get to meet you early on. But more importantly, this is someone that you can sort of really like bank on for driving through future rounds. So like that's the overall bit of Antler. But obviously you can hear it from me, but we can actually talk to some people who have been through this. I will take it off the screen share, given that you can probably see Ben's face and Van's face in better fidelity in the real version rather than their press photos. And we will kick off with a little bit of hang on, let me just stop the share. Just if I can just ask firstly, well, for both of you, but first to Van, please can you just explain your business and what led you to it? What was your previous life before Andizer?
Certainly, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Van, I'm the founder of Andizer. And much like a lot of you, I was a corporate employee before taking the jump through entrepreneurship. I spent a lot of time in senior corporate roles, with top tier companies like Walmart and Crocs, and more recently Deliveroo. And through those roles, I developed this understanding of, managing and navigating complex ecosystems. And a lot of my career was built on working with those complex ecosystems, whether it was synergies in supply chain or leading cross-functional teams or even driving growth in competitive markets. We came across the Antler residency in 2021, and it was a very interesting inflection point for me because it really came from the space of trying to do something that had a massive impact on the industry, not limited by the hierarchies of the organizations I was employed with. And so, as we go through that program, I'd love to share with you more about my insights and how the Antler program really helped me bring that vision to life and get that early validation and work towards building the company.
Thank you. And then Ben, same question. What's Authentified and what were you doing pre-Authentified to lead you towards this?
Thanks, James. So Ben Chamberlain, co-founder and CEO of Authentified. We're building the digital tools necessary for fashion brands to connect their customers into the secondhand marketplaces where they're actively looking to try and resell their pre-loved fashion. Getting there was an interesting journey. I spent 20 years working in corporate Australia. I worked for 10 years within the National Australia Bank in a variety of roles. I spent another 5 years working as a chartered accountant with a major accounting firm. And over the last 5 years of my corporate career, I was working for a US group where I was responsible for all of the major retail liquidations in the Australian market, a very obscure and niche area of insolvency, but one that got me very, very close to the idea of unwanted inventory. And so as I left that corporate career last year and was thinking about what to pursue, I became very interested in this idea of the wastage and the environmental impact that surplus inventory was having on the environment. And it got me very excited about that space. It got me very deep into fashion in particular. And that's where my idea originated from.
And then Ben, it's you could say it's largely a rational thing to do to leave your nice, successful, potentially well-paid, etc., corporate career and to go to you and an idea starting at zero. Like, help me understand like what led you to want to spend the next 5-10 years of your career on this founder journey versus continuing your successful corporate journey.
Yeah, I suppose there was a disconnect between what I felt was the effort that I was putting into my career and the return that I was able to generate. So I became more confident as I advanced in my career that perhaps there was a way for me to generate a higher return on my investment, not just a financial return, but also an emotional return on the work that I was able to put into the universe. I feel in many ways I was very lucky to be working for a US company where that idea of innovation, that idea of failing to succeed was very much an embedded part of the culture. And so as I went through that journey, I had the opportunity to be an internal founder, to take an idea that I'd had that could solve a whole bunch of problems globally for that US business and actually lead it, build it in Australia and deploy it from Australian soil and ultimately scale it out in the US. So in taking that path, it was almost like entrepreneurship, but with training wheels on, where I had the protection of a great corporate job, and it allowed me to demystify what it might take to actually build a business. And I got very excited by that and enjoyed that process, thoroughly. So, I wouldn't say that it was a clean break. For me, it was, this friction that I've since learned is not uncommon in people that have that founder mentality, that at some point you find yourself working tremendously hard as if it is indeed your business, and waking up one day and realizing it really isn't. And that if you're going to go and pursue that sort of effort, then you should do it under your own steam and find a way to take that journey and to have a crack at it yourself. So perhaps the entry point into Antler for me was in and of itself an interesting path. I had a problem space that I felt was interesting. I talked to a lot of clients that I'd previously worked with. And as I became more interested in this idea, it became clearer to me that I wasn't going to be able to execute on my own. And so a very good confidant of mine suggested that I apply for the Antler program to put it into the residency to see if I could find a technical co-founder that might be able to help me to exploit this opportunity. And that's exactly what I did. And I joined the program earlier this year.
Very cool. And then for Van, what would you say is the sort of the one great skill that your corporate career has helped you with on the founding side? And what's one thing you've either had to unlearn or reframe?
Yeah, certainly. I think a little bit like Ben, my journey, my goal of starting Endizer was to solve my own problem. So I, work for Walmart, I work for Deliveroo, I work for Crocs, all sides of the marketplace, as a buyer, as a seller, as a marketplace operator. And I realized the quantum of the opportunity and the impact we could have if we had good technology backing this problem. So really it stemmed from trying to solve my own problem. Now, I think when I came from corporate, one of the big strengths that a lot of us in corporate have is that ability to drive cross-functional impact and leadership, and the ability to look at complex ecosystems and solve complex problems. There are the guardrails of corporate, which is, the specialized departments and the ability to have multiple resources tackling a problem. I think that's one thing that I had to unlearn, the ability to, not depend on these specialized departments, but really wear multiple hats. So one day I'm looking through agreements without, the support of having a legal team. The other day I'm looking at contracts. Then I'm going out selling, but then I'm also working with the brand agency to develop marketing. So I think from an unlearned perspective, it was, building the confidence to do everything myself. But also, I think what I've done is I lean in on my strengths and really bring in the best talent I can to help me with other aspects of the business to build a really strong proposition.
Very cool. And Van, for you, it's obviously been a little bit of time since 2021 residency. Could you tell us what did that journey look like for you? Obviously, you're coming in to solve your own problem, but what did validation look like? Opportunity to meeting co-founder, IC. Give us a very rough timeline of what happened in the residency for you.
Certainly. So, I did want to solve my own problem, but I was also very mindful that I was a, corporate employee. I had a lot of skill sets. I had deep understanding of the domain and the problem, but I had not started a business before. And I was very ambitious in the fact that we wanted to build venture scale business. I did not want to start a small consultancy. I wanted to build something that could truly impact retailers across the world. And that's where Antler's involvement has been really meaningful, right from encouraging us to think in terms of design sprints and, diverging of ideas, converging of solutions, to helping us find the right co-founders. If you go back to the slide that James presented, and the 3 pillars, I was the domain expert. I knew the industry in and out. So I wanted a business expert, an ops expert, and I was really privileged to find a co-founder in Katie, who was ex-BCG, very strong in strategy, and could really help me in those early days think through the journeys and solve them and make it really easy from a build perspective. So I think from that standpoint, having accelerating the learning curve in terms of, how do you deal with investors? How do you get investment? How do you think about the company? How do you think about dilution? Helping with ambition and helping with understanding what are ways where you could scale without, a lot of risks on the side. I think those were very valuable. And then, the ability to sort of sprint through very quickly, iterate, get very good feedback. Antler also connected me with some really strong mentors, some of them who still helping us navigate us, as we face different challenges. But I think that accelerated learning curve, that ability to ask dumb questions, and the fact that we could get a co-founder. So by week 4, I think I had crystallized on the impact I wanted to have. Antler encouraged us to deeply think about the problem and understand who we're solving it for and what the impact is. By week 8, or I think, yeah, by week 8, we had a co-founder, we had a team, we had a deck. And then that investment really helped us accelerate our thinking and be a lot more serious about reaching out to customers and starting to build solutions with them. Over the last couple of years, obviously, the solution has moved with the customer. So we built in-house proprietary technology. We're a wholesale sourcing tool, helping multi-brand retailers source from their suppliers. So think about a David Jones or an Iconic or Culture Kings or wherever you like to shop from. They're constantly sourcing from their suppliers. So the suppliers are changing, the product mix is changing, and that's the transaction we help them digitize. So we help them get off PDF catalogs and Excel files from thousands of suppliers and digitize and centralize that product and order management journey. And the impact we've had on that P&L is to the scope of almost 5% in additional bottom line. And I think that's where we get a lot of our fulfillment and drive from, is seeing the impact we get in the P&L of our retail customers.
Very cool. And then, I mean, Ben, I remember that we actually, when we did the interview, like it was pretty much authentified as the kind of the problem bit, but quite a lot evolved, even if the problem was pretty similar from moment of the first time you and I met until we made the decision to invest. Like, what are a couple of the things that either changed or you sort of learned through that period?
To be very patient with the problem. There were meetings that I had with you and others within the Antler investment team where you would essentially stop me from discussing in any way, shape, or form a solution, which is a very hard.
Your answers were too long, Ben. No, I'm teasing you.
Yeah, they still are. So I became obsessed with the problem, and that was something that the Antler program really taught me, was to stay in the problem for as long as possible. The longer you're in the problem, the better the solution will be. And some of the tools and tips that residency gave me were only matched by the intensity with which the Antler team were pushing us. And so it wasn't enough to simply have a thesis. I'd been playing with this idea for 6 or 7 months, and I hadn't quite realized why it wasn't working. Before I came into Antler, I had 2 constituent parts of this, what I thought was the solution, right on the precipice of agreeing to a pilot agreement. But of course, the reason why they didn't was actually because there wasn't the right solution. I hadn't spent long enough in the problem. And so I think that obsession with the problem for that first, call it 3 or 4 weeks of the residency, was incredibly powerful for me. And then, you realize that you don't have any baggage. So when you're in a corporate setting, there's all these rules, there's things that you have to abide by, there's people you have to ask permission from. But actually, when you find yourself free of all of those, it's a daunting experience. But if you need to go and do research, you just go and do research. I remember in week 2 of the residency, you were challenging me on some of these assertions I was making. So I had my babysitter who looks after my 2 young children, who happens to be in her early 20s and was exactly the, who I was speaking for, had her go and do 40 hours worth of consumer research from all of her cohort of friends. And actually the findings were, call it 60 or 70% on point with where I thought they'd land, but the 30 or 40% that were different has completely transformed the direction that we've taken the business. So, I'd say that having the freedom, to pursue these ideas is both powerful, but you really need to grab it by the bullhorn. So, I describe the Antler experience for me as putting a rocket pack on my back, because there was no time to spare, and you didn't even have time to doubt yourself as to, these steps that you needed to take to try and prove out your problem space and ultimately your idea.
So now the last question to each of you. So that means for everyone on the audience, please, if there's questions you want to ask, now's the time to be thinking of them. Afterwards, I'll ask you to either raise the Zoom hand or put it in the chat afterwards. But like for both of you, starting with Van, like what's the one bit of advice you'd have for people in the audience knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I think I have two actually. The first is to play with your strengths, play on your strengths, find what you're really strong at. Your corporate career would have given you a very strong toolkit, a very strong skill set. Figure that out and then surround yourself with a team that can complement that skill set. And it doesn't have to be people working full time on the business. It could be, advisors and mentors from Antler. It could be a co-founder. It could be advisors you bring on board from your industry or your space. Or, like Ben said, it could be someone from your target audience who's willing to spend time and spend time on that problem with you. The second, I think, is patience and sort of having the patience to know that this is a long-term game and being able to patiently work with your customers and with your service providers to find the right outcomes for the business.
Very cool. Same question for you, Ben.
Yeah, I would say don't die wondering. I'm 41 years old. I always imagined that I would run my own business, but the pathway there was never super clear to me. And it took a pretty difficult exit from my last corporate career to really give me the oxygen and the space necessary to realize that this was my chance to give it a crack. I would say that I would perhaps, if I was doing it again, get myself slightly better prepared, financially, make sure that you do have a really clear sense as to what your next 12 or 24 months looks like and feel comfortable, operating at a much lower income level than all of you would otherwise be expecting in your careers, and to really account for that and plan for that and talk to your family about it. But if you can get your head around that, then my goodness me, what is the worst that can happen? You take a 2-year step out of your career that you've been working on for, call it 10 or plus years. If you take James's average, it's 11 years. The experience that you will get from going through this process will blow your mind. The relationships that you build, the credibility that you'll establish within the market will provide you with untold opportunities. We've just recently completed a follow-on investment round, and 2 of my investors are former bosses. One that I worked with 10 years ago, and the other one that I worked with about 5 or 6 years ago. One of them sat down and said, with his wife in tow, they said to me, Ben, we're so proud of you. We're so pleased that you're pursuing this. This is such an important thing to go after. Whether or not this works or not, we want to be part of the journey, and we know that you're going to do something great in the end. What a profoundly positive experience for me to have in my career, knowing that I've got that level of support. I'm going to put everything I can into this business and build it into $1 billion company. I'm reasonably confident we can do that. But if it doesn't work out, I tell you what, I'm not going to die wondering, and I know that something amazing is going to come from it.
Well, what better way to jump into potential Q&A? So please, we've got a couple in the chat to start with, but I want to give airtime to anyone that wants to ask questions for Van or Ben. All right, I guess we can start with the ones in the chat. I will go back up to the top, but at least to get Van and Ben started. What were your expectations before Antler's program? And then once you were in the program, how is your expectation met or exceeded?
I was very surprised to learn that Antler wasn't a luggage company. I do a lot of things on a whim, and applying for Antler was also one of those things. I really learned most about the program by actually starting the journey of applying and getting these very short 15-minute interviews with people like James, people like Rani, Rachel, and I became much more informed, but also much more excited by the prospects that this course would deliver through that journey. So my suggestion would be just to get in there, have a go, and get to know the team, and that will probably be the most powerful way to learn about what you should expect.
From my perspective, I came in really well planned, knowing what I wanted to do. I've been thinking about this for a year before I joined the residency. And because I knew I was transitioning from a corporate employee with a very generous salary package and that safety net of having a whole team helping you achieve your objectives, I took a lot of time in thinking through what that implication would be. And I, did the Founders Institute, did some part-time classes here and there, really understanding the mindset and if that was for me. So when I came into Antler, I was very certain this is what I wanted to do, what was the pathway. And I came in expecting investment, and I came in expecting that I will find a co-founder. Where Antler exceeded my expectations was the breadth of knowledge that they could share and the mentors they connected me with. So whether it was, people like Matt Brown, who are, in the investment space and could really walk me through how investors think and how they like, what they like to see, what works for their returns expectation, all the way from, Marla, who would walk us through literally on a slide, like she would write stuff and say, here's how you look at the double design sprint framework, or this is how you do a lightning jam. And a lot of those really we don't do in corporate worlds because decisions are not made very fast. Especially the scale of companies I worked with, which were multi-billion dollars, decisions were made over a course of months. And here we were trying to make them over a course of hours. And I think some of the frameworks that Antler brought to me, like the design sprint exercise and lightning jams and all of those, really helped me crystallize my thinking and saying, all right, this is a problem, there are 10 possible solutions, this is what I want to test with very quickly. And I think that input and that energy and that quick feedback loop of, my coming back with the results and them going, great, this is great, this is not, here's how you need to think about it. That was where I thought Antler really exceeded my expectations and helped us in a place where we got really confident of the solution we were building. And it gave us the confidence to also go back to market. And because we were building a B2B solution for enterprise, it gave us the confidence to go back and have chats and then really understand where the customers saw the value and what aspect of the product they wanted us to accelerate.
Can I just add to that, Van? You talked about confidence. One of the aspects I was very mindful of during the program was that even if you get the investment from Antler, there is still nobody investing more into this business than you are personally. And that to me was a very significant driver because it meant that the bar was even higher. I wasn't just seeking external validation, from this wonderful venture capital firm that had taken me through the journey. I had to convince myself first and foremost, because once you accept that check, you're also accepting your own investment into that venture. And I couldn't imagine being better prepared having gone into that investment committee meeting, knowing that actually I believe in this, and this is something that I'm prepared to now commit the next 1 or 2 years of my life to. And I think that ultimately that became quite a powerful lever in my journey and helped me to get over the line.
Totally. And, that investment is not just yours, it's your family as well. If you have a partner, they will invest equally by giving you the time and space you need to build. If you have children, some days they will potentially go without food. But, my point is the family comes to
Partner or children or both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Now they're all right. My kids are all right. 15, they can have their own pizza. I'm not around.
Okay.
But really, I think it does, to your point, Ben, I think it gives a credibility to, what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and accelerates that time frame. And it helps you get more confident and your family get more confident in what you're doing.
And maybe to extend on that, I'm a chartered accountant. I've worked in financial services for 20 years, but I had no idea how to enter this world of building a company with venture support. And it is its own beast. I can only imagine how difficult it must be for someone that starts a company and tries to retrospectively make it work for scale at the sort of scale that the venture community expects. Starting with Antler, building the company, registering the company under Antler's guidance, gives you the opportunity to actually set yourself up for success in a way that is profound. There's no doubt that, let alone the financial cost of trying to unwind a structure that isn't supportive of a venture investment, let alone setting up a company without some of the pro forma work that Antler have done on your behalf as company founders, would completely change the dynamics of trying to build a business. What you realize when you're in those early stages are that every minute is precious. And if you're spending a disproportionate amount of your time on low value tasks around company setup, as an example, you're really missing an opportunity to take an opportunity by those bullhorns.
Excellent. Matteo, let's go to raised hand up in the corner. Please.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Van and Ben, both for sharing your journey with us today. My question is for both of you. How much have you leveraged your existing network from the corporate world to be able to kick off the business and grow the business further? For example, Ben was talking about previous bosses investing in his business. So how much of your pre-Antler network has helped you in your journey?
For me, it's been one of the most powerful tools in my toolkit. When I was exploring the idea, I was blown away at how many doors I could open simply because a fashion brand in my circumstance had felt positively about me when they had worked with me in the context of me being an employee that was providing some sort of service. So all of a sudden, with a couple of text messages, a phone call, and some LinkedIn direct messages to my existing network, I was able to meet with C-suites across a raft of fashion brands, which for me was my, what was emerging as my ICP. And so, that 20 years of, head down, bum up, working through the corporate journey is now really paying dividends. And I would say that it's not only the direct network that you have, but when you start to become a lot more brave about asking somebody for a referral, asking for an introduction, and you match that with a passion for a particular idea, you surprise yourself constantly the doors that's able to open. So, when you're building and you're having to innovate, it's not enough just to innovate in the product. You have to innovate in your network. You have to innovate in the way that you think about supply chain. So for me personally, building some of the corporate partnerships have been as important as building some of the brand partnerships in helping me to get to the next stage in our business. So I think that's a fabulous question. I'd say that is the secret sauce of having a strong corporate background and coming into startup land, is that is a huge competitive advantage. If you've had that corporate career, it's not the only pathway, but man, it's pretty powerful.
Likewise, I think for me, coming from the industry meant people knew me and people knew what I was talking about. And I think somewhere they had confidence that I understood their problem, which was a huge checkbox. But equally, I think there's another side to it where a lot of my personal network was the C-suite, where, I could sell in the idea and get feedback, but a lot of my decision makers were not really in my close network. So I still had to do a lot of cold calling and cold emails and grunt work and figuring out who's the right person and reaching out and converting them. So it was twofold. I think it helps to understand the problem and understand their space and for them to see you've been in their shoes. But equally, there's no shying away from all the hard work, irrespective of whether you have the background or not, there's a lot of cold outreach or physical hard work, you'll have to do in terms of reaching out to your ICP and your core persona and understanding and convincing them of the value that the product brings to their business.
I think adding to the answers from the two guys, there's also the benefit of the corporate career is you've likely got a decent potential angel pipeline, like Ben shared. Having two of your former bosses on is both. If you've been successful in your corporate career, often it means that there will be others around you who are successful and have the income levels to do it. But also, if you think of as a signal to other investors, if someone that's worked with Ben for X number of years is investing, well, if they weren't investing, you'd be worried, but they are investing, so that means that's a good proof point. So I think thinking of the networks you've got from an investment perspective is also an advantage which other founder backgrounds don't necessarily have such an access to in the corporate side. And Eyal, let's go to Eyal, then we'll deal with a couple in the chat. Eyal, go for it.
All right, yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Ben and Van, for this awesome talk. My question is, let's say, during the 12 weeks residency, or what should we expect after that? And another question, when did you build your company? Is during the 12 weeks residency, the first stage of it, or yeah, if you would like to elaborate on that.
I think for me, the first 4 weeks was about understanding who else was in the cohort, what skills they brought, who were complementary, where could I find shared values, and working on design sprints with them to understand how we worked well together. And one of the things Antler does really well is build these pressure cooker sort of situations where you're working, on an alien problem with a set of people you haven't worked before. And what that does is it really gives you a very quick understanding of what different working styles are. And for me, the first 4 weeks were really about finding the right co-founder, finding people I wanted to work and build this with, and also validating the problem. So yes, I knew of the space, but what are the different aspects? What are the different subgroups, and where I wanted to go first was, for me, the biggest value I got. I think that networking initially was very important for me.
Yeah, I had a slightly different take. So the first 4 or 5 weeks is quite content heavy. So a number of the Antler executive team are rolling through and providing you with a crash course on venture capital, on how to ideate, on how to design, how to stay in the problem, how to pitch, and so it's quite content heavy. So the program won't have changed materially. So I would expect it's a full-time commitment. You're in that space with your local cohort day in, day out, in a bunch of breakaway groups as well as sessions. And to me, that education piece just felt like a light glow moment, because all of a sudden I understood how this business building process can work conceptually. So I can almost put that to one side, and I've got that. So now I've got to really focus in on this problem and make sure that I'm the right person to be trying to solve it, and to start narrowing in on what that solution might look like. So as someone that's done it more recently, like the first 4 or 5 weeks is a little bit of chaos at the beginning, a lot of networking. You're really trying to work out who are the people that you think might be your co-founder, but also who are those that you're going to want to really stay close to and learn from and bounce ideas off of one another. Still to this day, there are a number of people from my cohort in entirely different industries, and we're sharing constantly our experiences. We're asking each other for advice and tips all the way through. So it becomes quite a strong sort of collegiate group. Once you're starting to narrow in, you're starting to get some signals from the Antler group about whether or not you're on the right track to contemplate moving into the due diligence phase, where you've articulated your team, you've articulated the problem space that you're going after, and you're showing early signs of having a solution. And I would say that at that point, your time commitment increases, but at your own discretion. So there's a lot less formal sessions, but you are now on the clock looking to try and build up your business case for getting that ultimate check, which, if you've read any of the materials, looks like an investment committee meeting. It is an investment committee meeting. We have a certain amount of time to present your final proposition and seek funding. So, at its shortest, it's around 10 weeks, and it absolutely flies by. And through that time, you're getting access to, just incredibly talented people from within the Antler team in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, for that matter. You're getting all the support that you need to make sure that you can be as confident as possible going into those milestones.
Thank you. I will hit the chat. So, what qualities do you look for in founders in their first interview, and what do you see as the most important traits for success within the accelerator? In the interview process, we're really trying to ascertain 2 things. One is spike. So, like, what's something either as esoteric and niche or as kind of ethereal as possible? What effectively, try to answer the question, what's something that you might be one of the 5-10 best people in the world in a particular area? And then second area is founder DNA, which is a conglomeration of things like creative problem solving, leadership, grit, resilience, charisma, all these other bits. What it may feel like in an interview is a mix of asking things about your career and background, tell me when X, Y, and Z type stuff, or it can be, I think I remember, like, Ben, our interview, where largely I just tried to work out how smart I thought you were in the particular industry, and not that I know more about the industry than you, but that at least trying to set you up to mean that I was trying to bring out, like, what were distinctive points of view that you had, and what were ways in which if we were jamming on an idea, like, basically, how smart do I think you are in trying to approach it, whether I agree with what you're saying or not, being not able to judge on every idea. I think within the residency, like, we're really trying to go with trajectory, and that doesn't mean that everything's perfect. It's actually that this is the benefit we get of sitting side by side with you for 10 weeks or so. Like, we get a pretty good idea as to how you deal with adversity, how you take a knock from a potential customer falling through, and those other ones, and that actually it's that pace of learning more so than pace of putting runs on the board is actually one of the things that we're really looking for within the program, as well as the more classic things of, is there a big enough problem? Is it a team with an unfair advantage? Tyson asks about the investment pipeline, what the progression rates. I'm guessing this is relating to the slide of things. So if I answer of like, on a given cohort, it's roughly 70 or 80 people. We typically make 7 to 10 investments out of each cohort, 2 founders per cohort, just to make my math simple on towards the end of a Wednesday. If it was 80 people, 10 investments, 20 founders, 25% chance. But I think like the more important bit of that is what happens afterwards. So typically about 70 to 80% of teams will raise external capital within the first 12 months after Antler. So that means that that's another validation of what you are doing, but also by extension, what we're doing. And then the other bit, going back to what Ben said of the cohort being those people that in your cohort that are in entirely different businesses that you call up for bits of advice and other ones. This is an unusual scenario, as in there is positive competition. Like it's not a zero-sum game. If everyone who comes into the cohort ends up with a business that is backable, we'll back them. If no one does, we're doing nothing. But this is one where actually you can get inspiration and, frankly, in some cases, a boot up the backside from others that are in the cohort, but that their success doesn't mean your failure, and vice versa, which I think is an important like caveat to put on those progression rates. All right, let's go back to the chat and let me scroll down. Okay, back to Van and Ben. Sounds like you both had clear problems that you were looking to solve. What are your tips on how to find the problem? Like, was there a puff of smoke where you go, I'm here to solve how retailers source their suppliers, or for you, Ben, that moment where you had it, or was it a gradual bit over time? Van, if I start with you, please.
Certainly. I think, I knew the problem. I knew how painful it was, how difficult it was, how much it was costing both sides of the table. And for me, it was zeroing in on whether it needed to be, what that medium needed to be to solve that problem. But I think if I came in with a blank slate and I wanted to be an entrepreneur, you guys are living in the best time possible. Like in the last couple of years, with ChatGPT coming in, AI has taken a whole new meaning. We're almost at an inflection point. And if you go back 100 years, we probably were 100 years ago, people were just at the start of that industrial revolution. So for you all, like there should be no dearth of ideas. AI can be massively, exponentially beneficial to almost all your industries. So I would sort of go back and say, all right, in this new scheme of where the technology has gone, what can I improve in the lived experiences I've had, whether it's personal or professional? And, if I were you, I'd start from there and say, like, even today, we have conversations in the house and we've built in, AI tools to accelerate some of our work. So some of that grunt work where, person A sends an Excel file, which has to be translated into person B's outcome, and at a scale of thousands of Excel files on a monthly basis. We used to write scripts. We're all using ChatGPT now, and we're using plugins and tools that we built on top of that. So I would almost say you guys are this is the best opportunity, the best time for you to leverage development in technology and see how in your lived experience and across the companies that you work for and across people that you work for, what was the best job you had? Where did you find real happiness? And what can you improve for organizations like that?
James, I'd say, where do you have an unfair advantage? So from your corporate experience, what have you developed as personal IP within that particular corporate setting that would mean that you would be signaled out as someone that has a particular advantage or an unfair advantage in going after a solution for that problem? So you might have unfair access to do research on that sector. You might have unfair access to C-suite executives that operate within that industry. You might have unfair understanding of how the actual business is run or built. What is that unfair advantage that you have that mean that, to use a term that James often used with me, why are you in the 1% of people in the world that should be going after that problem to solve? So to compare that to perhaps what the opposite or in the alternate, it's unlikely to be things that you've experienced in your day-to-day that every other human being around the world has experienced. So think about an area of your life where you have an unfair advantage. I feel like that's a good starting point. And often it's right under your nose. It's a grievance or an annoyance that you have in your own job. It's something that you've observed your company doing that you think that is such a silly way to do that in 2024. That's often not a bad place to start.
Yeah, I'd second that. I think it sort of plays into the question you will get asked again and again, which is, what is your right to win? And I think having an unfair advantage is a really good pathway to having a strong right to win in that space.
Very cool. And then we've got, I'll do one more from the chat and then last call for the final question from live. Question for you, Van. You mentioned you went through the Founder Institute program. How far did you go into that and building business prior to Antler? And was there some crossover? How did the two work together?
Yeah, I think, well, there wasn't any crossover at all, actually. I was thinking about, I had a full-time job with a very generous salary package, as I'm sure all of you do as well. And so for me, it was a couple of questions I needed to work out in my own head about, what are the expectations I need to be mindful of when I jump into entrepreneurship? So it was more, educational in terms of, going through some of those forums and classes and understanding, hearing the speakers talk and hearing, entrepreneurs who've done really well talk about their experiences across building culture, across, setting personal boundaries, professional boundaries, working with small teams, building the right team. So it was very educational, but I had not really built a company or incorporated it in, or even sort of fleshed out that problem in detail. But what it did help me was when the times were tough after we had built the business, because I had that foundation, I knew I had internally set expectations that helped me navigate through those times. So not much crossover. I think Antler is very fast-paced, very intense. You come in, you should have a problem or have a clear sense, or find someone who has a problem you can get behind. And then quick validation, quick discovery, get some initial runs on the board, get customers, get funding, and then get on with it. Whereas I think for me, that previous stage was more alongside my job. I was testing waters and understanding, would I be happy with those expectations and with those outcomes if I jumped into entrepreneurship?
Fantastic. Last call for any live questions. If not, I will extend my gracious thanks to everyone for spending an hour with us, but particularly for Van and Ben for giving us the inside lid. Sounds like the top takeaways would be definitely speak to your significant other if you're considering this. There's more people than just you involved. Don't die wondering. Actually, although corporate seems like a bit of a direct shift or change, the unfair advantage that you're looking for is probably staring you in the face, and that your networks are going to be a vast benefiter to you versus anyone else going after. Sure, there's a few other bombos and quotable bits that came through. But those are a couple of the things that you wouldn't find on an average LinkedIn post that occurred to me from what you two said. So I really appreciate you spending the time and appreciate it.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Van.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
Good stuff.
Thank
Thanks
you,
very
everyone.
much. Goodbye.
Thanks, team.